Well, Happy New Year, everyone. According to the Christian calendar, the Advent is the first day of the new year on the Christian calendar. So, so many different places have different starts of the new year. So I know ours is January. But the cycle starts over in Advent. And so as today is the first Sunday of Advent, Advent is kind of like Lent, where Lent prepares us for Easter, and it's much longer. But Advent prepares us for Christmas. And so during this year in Advent, I thought that we would look at some of the different well-known Christmas hymns and look at what they have to tell us about the Christmas story. Now, for most Christmas hymns, if you read through all the verses, you're going to hear everything. I mean, you're going to hear the whole Christmas story in just about every song. And we're not going to cover the whole Christmas story today because, number one, that would be kind of anticlimactic, right? I mean, Christmas is still 4 weeks away. So that would be a little anticlimactic. But we are going to talk about some themes and some ideas in the Christmas story. And so today we're going to look at It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. And if there's one thing that we have, it's the theme of angels and proclamations and annunciations. The angels proclaiming what's going to happen and telling people what to do and where to go. Angels are very active in the Christmas story, perhaps more active than any other time in the Bible. And now we know some about angels, but a lot of what we know about angels comes from a mixture of scripture and Hollywood and legend. So in the Bible, we usually don't have a presentation of a cute little cherub. We don't have a presentation of a person with a halo and wings. Really very few descriptions of angels in the Bible. If we look in the Old Testament, angels looked oftentimes like regular people. And so many times people would find out later, oh, this is an angel, not a regular person. And so that's where we get the saying, we might be entertaining angels. Also, as we think about angels, oftentimes people would say, we didn't realize it was an angel, but it was a messenger of God. And so angel means messenger, a messenger from God to tell something. Right? Now, usually an angel would not come to just say, everything's going to be okay. Usually we think of angels as bringing peace and security and safety. No. Usually when angels come in the Bible, they bring fear. People respond with fear to the angels. So they must be pretty intimidating, because if you have to go around and whenever you start to talk to somebody, you have to start by saying, fear not, you're probably an intimidating presence, okay? So angels oftentimes have to start off by saying, don't get scared. So they must be intimidating. There must be something that's somewhat terrifying and somewhat awe-inspiring about angels. And so we come to the story. We're going to be bouncing back and forth between Matthew and Luke. The Gospels all present the Christmas stories in a different way, those that bother to tell the story. 2 of the 4 Gospels don't even talk about Christmas. No mention of it whatsoever. For whatever reason, the authors didn't feel that the story was important enough to include in their version of the story. Maybe they were in a hurry and they wanted to get right to when Jesus started his ministry. But for whatever reason, we have the Christmas story in Matthew and Luke, but not Mark and John. And so that's why you'll always see that we're in those 2 Gospels during the Christmas season. Matthew focuses on the point of view of Joseph. Luke focuses on the point of view of Mary. And so we're going to start in Luke at the angel's visit to Mary. Now, Mary has the angels named. In this part, the angel's not always named, but here the angel is named Gabriel. And Gabriel comes to Mary and says that, greetings, favored one. And indeed, she is highly favored and blessed. As we talked about, some of you haven't had the Advent study, so I probably shouldn't give a preview, but many of you who are in it have read the chapter probably. But Mary is respected in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church. She's respected in the religion of Islam. She is of course, the Protestant church, and she was a Jewish woman. So she is highly favored in many different religions. And so the angel comes to her and has an announcement to make. And as I said, usually if an angel comes to give you an announcement, it is not something that just says, I want you to know everything's going to be okay. Usually it's, your life is going to be turned upside down. So figure that things are going to be turned upside down if you have a visit from an angel. And indeed for Mary, Gabriel says, greetings, favored one. You are going to, and explains that you're going to give birth to the Messiah, and you're going to be the mother of Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. And so Mary responds and says, how can this be? A little bit of background. She said that she is, she's not been with a man, she's a virgin. How can this be? Mary probably would have been around 13 years old, an adult by biblical standards. When you hit puberty, for much of human history, you were considered an adult. And so she would have been arranged to be married to Joseph. Her parents would have arranged that marriage, as marriages were always arranged at that time. And so this is an engagement. They're engaged or betrothed to be married. Engagements back then usually lasted a year, and during that time, the husband-to-be would go and prepare a house for the new family. It would either be a separate dwelling, or it might be an addition that's built onto the building of one of their parents. But either way, the man would go and prepare a place for them. And an engagement was legally binding, and so if you wanted to get out of an engagement, you had to get a divorce. So that's a little bit of background information. So Mary says, how can this be? I am still a virgin. And the angel explains that this will be a supernatural conception, a supernatural birth. This is not going to be by human means, but this is going to be a holy child. And so her next response is, I am a servant of the Lord. She humbly accepts. Now let's back up a little bit and go to Matthew now, the first gospel in our order in the Bible. Now we're looking at Joseph. And Joseph's story is a little different. Whereas Mary heard from an angel, Joseph hears from Mary. So Joseph hears from Mary that she is going to have this child. And so that's a little bit harder to take. And he has other emotions to go through. Does he believe her? No. The answer is no. So his first response is that he is going to divorce her quietly. He's going to call off the engagement because she's not the woman that he thought. And yet he's going to not make a big fuss over it, so he's not going to make a spectacle. He is just going to divorce her quietly. That's a realistic response. But then he receives a visit from the angel too. Except this isn't a dream. He's not awake like Mary was. He's dreaming, and he's having a vision in which the angel says, what Mary is saying is true. This is what's happening. Take her to be your wife as planned. And so then, whereas Joseph's first response was divorce, his second response, like Mary, was humble obedience. And so we have these two visits from the angels. We have another visit from the angels in Zechariah and Elizabeth, when Zechariah is offering the incense offering. We won't talk about that today. But there's one more that I want to talk about. So we're going to go back again to Luke chapter 2. Jesus is born, and the shepherds, where we're focusing on the shepherds now. And an angel of the Lord appears to the shepherds at night, proclaiming that the child is born, the King of the Jews. And so the angel tells them to go to Bethlehem, where they will find him lying in a manger. And then after that, a choir of angels sings. Boy, if angels appear kind of like normal folks in the Old Testament, I doubt they did in this case. This must have been, an awe-inspiring and terrifying event all wrapped in one, as it says that these shepherds were afraid. And yet they were also curious. And so they do what they were told. They go to Bethlehem and they find Jesus in the manger. You know, it's kind of interesting. It's like in the Christmas story, the angels are like the directors of a Christmas play. You know, they're like directing all of the events. They're talking to all the different parts, and they're telling them what to do and where to go. It's like the angels are telling Mary, okay, now Mary, now you are going to be the mother of the Messiah, and so we want you to continue on. You're going to be the mother. Now Joseph, now we want you're going to be her husband, okay? You're not going to get a divorce. You're going to be the husband, and so we want you to come alongside her. Okay, now shepherds, now Jesus is born, so this is your time to come on over to Bethlehem to see the manger. You know, it's like they're directing everything, you know, just like a play. And that can be comforting to us because that can remind us that God is watching over us through the events of life. I know that sometimes, a lot of the time it doesn't seem as though God is watching over us when we look at the events of the world, but God is. And just as God was with Mary and Joseph in the midst of their chaos, in the midst of their unexpected change of plans, you know, Mary probably expected that she would be married and then have kids, not the opposite. And she probably, this would be inconvenience for the rest of her life, right? What will people think? Some people will not believe. Some people will lose respect for her, and she will also ultimately, I'm not sure how much she's aware of this at this point, but she will ultimately have to live through the death of her son, which many people have had to live through the death, and it's very difficult, and she had to be there and experience his crucifixion. And so she is being called to great inconvenience in her life. And Joseph, calling to be her husband, is alongside her. Now, of course, later on at the point of Jesus' crucifixion, Joseph isn't there. He's gone. Many scholars believe he may have passed away, but we're not sure. But they are inconvenienced. The calling of God can sometimes be an inconvenience, but as they go through the chaos of Christmas, going to a place to be taxed or to be counted for taxes, going into labor at the most inconvenient of times, having not a great place to stay to give birth. As these chaotic events unfold, God is with them and God is watching over them. And it's a reminder to us too that when things are not going well, God is with us. God does not guarantee a life free of pain or discomfort or inconvenience, but God is still watching over us during those times. The angels also remind us that God is a God of justice. As we see the angels speak and involve the people at the bottom of the social ladder. The shepherds are not highly esteemed. The elite look down upon the shepherds. Being a shepherd is a dirty job. The hours are not always great. These shepherds are working at night. They have to find places for the sheep to graze. And some shepherds who are not quite all honest will let their sheep graze on other people's land, which doesn't endear them to the people who own the land. And so some shepherds, stereotypically, many shepherds were seen as being thieves. And so shepherds were not looked upon kindly in the world, and yet God chose to announce it to shepherds. We are meant to see the contrast between Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and Herod the Great. When somebody in history is called great, it means they were really cruel and really powerful, generally. They were really powerful. They had a lot of worldly influence and power, and therefore they were considered great. Perhaps because they proclaimed themselves great. Herod was very powerful. Some of his structures are still visible today that he had built during his time period. He was also very paranoid, as he had two of his sons killed, his wife's mother, and another person of his wife's family killed because he was afraid that they would take power from him. And so he's a little insecure. And little. And so we are meant to see the contrast between Jesus, this baby, King of the Jews, Well, Herod is the king of the Jews. Not the king of the Jews that the people elected. No. The Jewish people didn't have a choice over who was their king anymore, since they were oppressed. Usually the Romans were somehow involved in picking who their king was. So Herod was their not chosen king of the Jews. And so Herod oversaw things. He oversaw some things that made him liked by some of the people. He helped reinforce the temple and make some improvements to the temple, but he also did some very ruthless things. And so you see Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Savior of the world, Son of God, the bringer of good news to the world. All of these are political terms that were used of the Roman emperor of the day. And so these are highly charged words. And, we tend to spiritualize too much of the Bible because we're so far removed from their context that we assume this is spiritual language. It's not. It's political language. When Mary sings her well-known song called the Magnificat, she talks about the economic reversal that takes place when Jesus is here, as it says that the poor will be lifted up and the high and mighty will be brought down low. Who do they have in mind with the high and mighty? The Romans, Herod, people in power. And so she sees this great reversal where God is honoring those on the bottom, not those on the top. And so this is very threatening. But we spiritualize so much of that language. And instead of saying, well, Mary's actually talking about the poor, we spiritualize it, and sometimes we say poor in spirit or what have you, and we interpret it in a different way. And then we completely remove Jesus from the public sphere of life. And so rather than viewing Jesus as the king of the world and influencing every aspect of our life, we say, well, no, it's more about just certain things we believe in God and about getting to heaven when we die. And then if it's just about getting to heaven when we die, then we kind of demote Jesus to where he's no longer king of the world, and instead he's secretary of afterlife affairs. And so all that he's concerned about and all that religion is concerned about is getting to heaven when you die and believing the right things about God. And that's really handy for the empires of the world, because then if Jesus is just concerned about the other life and then the non-real stuff, so to speak, then that gives the empires of the world an excuse that they don't have to follow the teachings of Jesus. We can do things our own way. And whether that's exploiting the poor or whether it is whatever it might be, showing power and might and intimidation to hurt other people, whatever it might be, then that is okay because Jesus is more for the spiritual side of things, and then we deal with this. Somebody should have convinced Herod of that. I mean, if that was true, you see, we separate the religious from the other aspects of life so much that we start to ask ourselves, well, I wonder why they would have killed Jesus. He was so nice. He was so nice, and he just wanted to be kind to everyone. Why would anybody want to hurt Jesus? He's no threat. Somebody should have told Herod that before he gave the order that all children 2 and under in Bethlehem should be killed, just to make sure that Jesus was gone. Somebody should have told many of the Roman emperors that as they lit up Christians as torches in their backyard. Somebody should have told many people that who saw Christianity, the birth of Jesus and his movement, as a very real threat to the status quo. You see, the angels understood. Mary understood when she sung her song that God was declaring that he was going to change everything. And that the interesting thing about the Christmas story is that God did not choose to involve anyone of power. God did not involve anyone of influence. You want to know how to change the world? It's a cliche, but be the change that you want to see. Yeah? God picked regular folks. He did not pick those in power. He could have gone to Herod, would have been a mistake, right? But he could have gone to Herod, or he could have gone to somebody in power who had influence, and instead he He went to normal folks. Normal folks, the way that we change the world is normal folks following Jesus. And when I mean following Jesus and living for Jesus, I don't mean just believing certain things about Jesus. I'm talking about following the actual teachings of Jesus that are in the Bible. Because they are followable. Sometimes we think, oh, that's impossible, we can't do that. Yes, you can. Sure you can. It's just hard. And we're not necessarily going to do it all the time perfectly, but we can follow the teachings of Jesus. And so we change the world by actually following the teachings of Jesus. Treating people as children of God, caring for the poor, visiting the sick, seeking to comfort those that are grieving. You know, when we go out and we try to treat everyone as children of God, made in the image of God, whether they know God or not, when we show people the love of God rather than retribution, when we show people rather than judgment, when we try to tell them about the love of God and help them to experience the love of God, when we treat others as we would want to be treated, when we follow the teachings of Jesus, this is going to be, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, and not all of the problems of the world would go away. It'd be a lot better. It'd be a lot better, especially if every Christian did that. And so, I want to encourage you as we think about the angels in the Christmas story. We remember that God watches over us. In the craziness of life, God watches over us. And number two, God is a God of justice, and God is concerned with all that goes on in the world. And that when Jesus calls us, he calls us to follow him, not just in church, not just in our private prayer life, but also in our public life, in every sphere and aspect of life, whether it is political, whether it is private, whether it has to do with our family, our community, whether it has to do with international. You know, it doesn't matter. In every aspect of life, Christ calls us to follow him, to follow his teachings, and that in so doing, we see a world, we see a vision of it, in which the poor are lifted up. Those that are at the bottom are lifted up and are seen to be valued as children of God, and those that are already convinced that they're high and mighty are humbled to realize that they are children of God too, but that we are all together children of God, and that we are all called by God. And so that's what that's talking about, what Mary's talking about. The poor will be lifted up, the high and mighty, usually in their context they're talking about the cruel oppressors, right, are brought down low. And so there's a meeting where everybody is on a level playing ground, and we realize that all people are in need of God's love and grace. And if we can live our lives in that way, then indeed we will change the world. As Christ changed the world, not by toppling the Roman government, not by challenging Herod, but by simply being born and being announced to the shepherds. If we don't think that following Jesus will really make a big difference in the world, just look at the Christmas story. And what in the Christmas story would you believe that would lead to change the world? Okay, some nobodies gave birth to a child in a manger, and it was announced to shepherds who have no influence. And so they came and said hi, and then left. And then 3 random people from far off come by, the Magi, and they say hi, and they leave. That's not going to change the world, folks. That's not how you change. Many experts would say that's not how you change the world. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to get a social media account, you got to get all these advertising, you got to change the world. We know how to change the world, right? We know how to get the message out, and it's not going to be by using shepherds. It's not going to be by getting obscure people that have no influence, right? We want people in power. We want people in offices. We want people who are elected, who can, they're the ones who can make a difference, right? So often we place our hope in elected officials, politicians, political parties, and they have their part too, right? I mean, they can do good as well, but if we just place all of our hopes on people who have have more influence and power than us. That just doesn't seem to be the way that God chose to change the world. God chose to change the world through a baby and some shepherds and some magi. And so, if you need convincing that following Jesus changes the world, read the Christmas story. It just might change your mind. Amen.